Welcome back, everybody. It's Rodrigo Fonador with another episode of Asheville Real Estate News. Really excited today. We got a really special opportunity to sit down with Mayor Manheimer here at the city of Asheville and just talk about real estate, growth, development, and the balancing act between keeping everybody happy, which, you know, for all intents and purposes is probably impossible. But without further ado, Mayor, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks for joining us. We had you on about a year ago, but just in case for people who didn't listen to that episode yet, do you mind just giving us a brief background of, how you got to Asheville and how you've enjoyed being mayor and kind of where you are today?
Sure. Well, how I got to Asheville, I came to Asheville in 1988, the summer I turned 17. My family moved here from the Washington, D.C. area, and I'd lived on the West Coast when I was younger. And I showed up here and went to Asheville High for my last year of high school and graduated. And it wasn't a super exciting town back in 1988, but and I mean, honestly, as a teenager, I had reservations about moving from a big city to a little city. So I went away to college and I came back and fell in love with this city with my more mature views on things and decided eventually, and we're fast forwarding quite a bit because I'm 47 as we sit here today, to run for office in 2009. I ran for city council.
Awesome.
Yeah. And then in 2013, I ran for mayor and
Been
did
mayor
it again 4 years later.
Yeah, no, well, it's been quite a run, and I think it's exciting to talk about real estate with you specifically because your background is in real estate, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, I have done a lot of work throughout Western North Carolina in the area of real estate litigation, actually,
Right.
Land disputes, easement disputes, title issues for people who are kind of wonky about real estate. And I've represented a lot of homeowners associations throughout Western North Carolina, which are like little mini cities, and they have their own problems with short-term rentals and roads and maintenance. And so that's been kind of an interesting, funny overlap. And I did some work with zoning issues. I had clients in Avery County and Henderson County and all over the place. That's actually how I got very interested in local government, was it myself appearing before local government bodies. So yes, I do like to. I like to talk. I like to talk about real estate. It used to be a lot more fun to talk about real estate, and now, that the city's growing quite quickly, and I'm hearing a lot from people about their feelings about that. It's kind of a little more.
There's a little bit more tension.
Yeah, and strong opinions. I would say that strong opinions on both sides, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I was hoping maybe that'd be a good place to start. Is where you kind of feel things are from a growth and development standpoint here in Asheville, the balance between trying to keep the local Asheville flavor and all the tourists and hotels coming in and balancing, investing, short-term rentals, people wanting to not have neighborhoods change, et cetera. It's a quick 30-second overcap of where things are, I guess. Yeah.
Well, so like I said, when I moved here in 1988, Asheville wasn't, to me, all that exciting. And we still had a lot of boarded up downtown. And obviously that's not the case anymore. So, I was talking with reporter John Boyle, and I was joking with him that we had about 10 minutes right in that sweet spot where we were, not economically distressed anymore, but we hadn't grown too much. But that lasted for a flash.
10 minutes.
And so now, now I think there is a great deal of concern about growth in Asheville and how that will affect the quality of life here. I mean, obviously the number one thing that makes Asheville what it is how beautiful it is. Right. It's right here in these beautiful mountains. And I think that there is a great deal of concern about how you maintain that beauty and preserve the environment we live in, so it continues to be a wonderful place to live, but then also manage the pressures of growth. So, that is not an exact science. And You can study land growth, smart growth. I go to plenty of planning conferences. I hear from experts, if you will, on how a city should grow. But then, you hear from the community, you hear from the constituents, and the marrying the smart growth policies on the one hand with the concerns and will and intuitions of the people is a difficult thing because they are not typically closely aligned.
Yeah, I can imagine that's hard to find a lot of good overlap in those areas. I was just on the real estate side, I was going to run through a couple of series of questions, kind of hit them off and just see how it goes. So wanted to start with, we asked a couple of our listeners ahead of time if there's any specific questions. And one of the questions I was personally most intrigued about was some of the mixed use areas like downtown or Haywood Corridor that had been banned with short-term rentals. Is that something that would ever be revisited? I know kind of it is a fluid issue, but didn't know if that's something that had been discussed yet or if that's just kind of set in stone until further notice.
So there's been an evolution for your listeners who are listening to this. There's been quite an evolution around short-term rentals. Short-term rentals were never legal under our zoning code in neighborhoods, but they were not prohibited in commercial areas. So downtown or on the major corridors like you're talking about. Yeah. And for two reasons, the city council went ahead and banned short-term rentals. And when I talk about that, I mean whole house or whole unit rentals across the whole city. You can still do what's called a homestay, which is where you rent out up to 2 bedrooms in your own home. And that's actually kind of the typical Airbnb model quite often. The reason that the council took the step to ban short-term rentals throughout the city was, one, the concern around the erosion of the long-term rental market. About half of the people in Asheville are renting, and it's something like 49%. And when you take units off the market that go to the short-term rental market, you're taking them off the long-term rental market potentially. That limits the amount of rental housing available, increases the pressure and the prices around long-term rental, and you price people out. So that's one. Affordable housing is the one concern. And the other was a loud outcry from neighborhoods saying, bringing in short-term rentals into our neighborhoods ruins the neighborhood fabric. It changes the climate. I've got, a party house next door, and I don't like that. I want to know my neighbors. So, yes, I think that while there are no immediate plans to revisit short-term rental policies, I can foresee that would happen. The short-term rental movement, if you will, was very quick and extreme in Asheville. And I think quick. And I think the council sort of felt like, man, you can't put this genie back in the bottle, so we better put some restrictions here and see how this goes. Asheville has more short-term rentals because we have a bunch grandfathered now, plus our homestays, than any other city in North Carolina by 1,000,000 miles. And I've heard statistics that we have more short-term rentals here than Charlotte, Raleigh, Durham, and Wilmington combined. So we're, it is not an insignificant thing for our community. And so I think we need to tread carefully and make sure it is appropriate, settle into where we are now. And there's still folks that are saying, you're taking away my right to make some money off of my properties, and that's not fair. I should be able to do what I want with my land. And I hear that argument. I think there's some legitimacy to that. But I also think that the overwhelming numbers of potential Airbnbs or short-term rentals in Asheville is so great that it could really change the feel of our city in neighborhoods.
No, that makes it's a delicate balance of, your rights as a property owner versus at the same time you're choosing to live in a community fabric, and that's kind of part of it, right? In regards to the long-term market, how do you feel that's going for the affordability thing? I know might sometimes feel like it's an uphill battle, but I know the bond money came through. Was that 2 years ago, I guess, when it was voted on? How has the city been excited or encouraged about the progress about deploying the bond money for affordable housing with some of the land use projects and developments that are, on the horizon?
Yeah, we have probably the most robust affordable housing program in the state. We're using more tools than any other community. Other cities come and visit us to see what we're doing. Now, I will say, one thing that I always say is you can't buy yourself out of an affordable housing crisis.
Yeah.
You just simply can't do it. The per unit subsidy needed is in the thousands and thousands of dollars. So, and that comes from taxpayer money. So how, it's just impossible when you're talking about needing many thousands of units to satisfy the affordable housing need. You can't do it. You need the economy to shift in your favor to really, really address it. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't do anything. And so we are doing quite a lot. One thing I'm real excited about is we're looking at city-owned land and how to leverage that into affordable housing that we can restrict for however long a period of time to make sure it remains affordable. And also that way try to address the gentrification of our neighborhoods by preserving these pockets of affordable housing throughout our city. We have an interactive map you can look at on the city's website to look at all of the city's land inventory and what its current status is and what we're looking at in terms of what land we're looking at to use for affordable housing. We're also partnering with the Housing Authority to redevelop public housing. And the first project there will be the redevelopment of Lee Walker, which is the oldest public housing neighborhood in Asheville. And we should be breaking ground this spring or early summer on that. So
it's exciting.
That is very, very exciting.
And I'm sure you guys are hoping, is that going to be like a proof of concept type of thing once that gets rolling, show the viability, the positive ripple effects, and then kind of try to scale quicker from that point?
Yeah, it's a very delicate thing because you're basically saying to people who live in these neighborhoods, oh, hey, we got this great idea, you're going to love it. It doesn't really work like that. You've got to get community trust and buy-in and involvement in that process. And I'm happy to say in the Lee Walker redevelopment that happened. The residents participated in selecting the developer and the design of the units and really helped be a part of the process all the way through. To me, the trust is so critical if we're going to invite other neighborhoods to do this as well, and there are many more in Asheville. So I have a great deal of hope in this, and I'm looking forward to it happening, and I'm looking forward to families moving back into the new housing.
No, absolutely. So I grew up in Bogota, Colombia, big city. And when you're sharing your experience of moving here, I had a similar. I was like, man, this is super small. It's the middle of nowhere, relatively speaking, from my experience. And which is funny. My wife, this is the biggest place she's ever lived. This is the smallest, and so it's kind of different worldviews.
Yes.
But on that note, how do you feel the city's been doing, or what's the role of balancing, Asheville being an economy that's a lot of tourism money that's coming in, and balancing the need for that influx of money and the people that live here, surviving or being happy. It seems like every time I hear people talk, they're always like, oh, there's too many people coming in. Typically, I'm like, it's really not that big of a deal. And like, thank goodness that there's people that are moving here and coming in. But how do you balance that?
Yeah, people say, I got an email once from a constituent that said something about too many people coming in, and then her tagline in her email was that she was a realtor specializing in sale of second homes. And I was thinking, do you see the irony in that your job is based on people? But people don't see that irony at all. They don't. I don't think a lot of people feel that whatever it is they're doing in Asheville for a living is necessarily related to the tourism industry. So they themselves don't want to see more people coming into Asheville.
It might just be the answer. It's a conversation, you can't win, I guess, but
yeah. Well, no, there's no, I've given up the whole concept of winning. I would say. I think we try to manage it as best we can, recognizing that Asheville has always been dependent on the tourism industry. And frankly, the tourism industry has made Asheville what it is because even for other employers who aren't involved in tourism, they want to locate here because this is a beautiful place to be, and their employees want to live and experience it. We have some natural limitations on our growth, so to our own good. I mean, geographically, you cannot build all the way up the side of all these mountains, and so there is limited land for new growth and development. You'll notice a lot of it is to the south and down into Henderson County. So that's just a natural factor. Some people will say, well, how come you can't just say no? Why can't you just, close the gate and no one else can come here and not a single thing can be built here until we have a better road structure, or until, whatever the case may be, and that's not an option, obviously, because we don't own all the land. To some extent, people get to do things with their own land, and they get to make their own decisions about moving here. So we just try to make sure we're managing the growth in the best way we possibly can. And that's really with a lot of community input. We just finished the comprehensive plan, which is kind of a guide for the growth of the city. And that was over a year-long process with a lot of community members weighing in and giving their input around that document, and to help sort of give us a roadmap for what they want to see in terms of the growth here in Asheville. We can get into, it's funny, I get comments from people, they'll say, don't approve another hotel downtown, put them all on the periphery. And then I'll get other people who say, concentrate all the growth downtown. Don't let anything grow out because we need to preserve and not sprawl.
Just depends where you live, probably.
Right. It's just like you said, you bring your personal experiences with you, other cities you lived in. We have a lot of people, obviously, that have moved to Asheville and live somewhere else. And so they bring with that their own, how did they experience public transportation? How did they, what was their experience with the economy and the job market? So they bring all of that with them, and then quickly get involved.
You're right.
Which is good. I love an involved community.
Want to ask you about getting involved, but before I forget, I also want to ask you about public transportation. I grew up in a big city. Public transportation, most people, having a car in Bogota is actually annoying because it's just a hassle to park it and security, and so everybody lives on public transportation. Are there, and I know it's a tough thing to tackle well, but are there any specific plans in making public transportation either more accessible or wide-reaching? So if you do live on the outsides of Asheville, there's legitimate, consistent, stable ways to get into town for work or whatnot. Well,
so the city has a public transportation system. We have a bus system, and we have a very involved transit commission who's helped develop with staff a transit master plan for how to build out our public transportation system just within the city. When I was first elected to council, we didn't yet have Saturday service and Sunday service and holiday service and extended hour service. So now all of that has been gradually implemented. We need more frequency on the current routes we do have. We probably need new routes, but there is an outline in the transit master plan, if anyone cares to go online and look at it, to show the build out, the future build out of the transit system. Every year we have been ticking away at the next part of that and adding to it. Offering transit is extremely expensive, but absolutely necessary. The southeast of the United States is the least dependent on public transportation, just traditionally and historically. If you lived in New York City, you might not have owned a car and you rode the subway everywhere. But in the South, we just haven't historically had, orientation
it's just not been part
public
of the culture.
Transportation. Right, exactly. And there's not the infrastructure. We don't have a subway system anywhere, around here. But So I think there has been in the past communications on and off with the county about whether to extend public transportation out past the city line into the county in some high volume areas, and that conversation is still ongoing. The county operates what's called mountain mobility, and that's all that I know of that exists right now in the county. So
yeah, okay, yeah, it seems like one of those things, like you mentioned, it's really hard to actually make headway on, but could have really big ripple effects.
Yeah.
What is the best way for people to get involved, no matter what side of the aisle? And as we're wrapping up, just people have opinions. People want to have certain things come to play or come to fruition. So how does somebody start? Is there a best recommended way to get started? Certain committees, et cetera. Where does somebody go?
Well, I mean, it's funny. Somebody was asking me this the other day. And I mean, first of all, you got to read the paper, whether it's online or, you physically get the paper. I know that's passe. Everybody gets online now. Yeah. Even me. And so I think the paper does a pretty good job of covering kind of the latest and greatest. And when I say the paper, I mean the Asheville Citizen-Times, but you should also, look at the Mountain Express does great coverage, and lets you know kind of what the big things are. They'll always cover, the budget cycle and what we're considering. So just to get your basics, I think that's really helpful. There's some interesting forums online to read to see the conversations. I would give a shout out to Asheville Politics is a Facebook page that I look at a lot, where they really limit it to local government issues for the most part. And I can go on there and see what if people think about what do people think about the proposal tonight for the Flatiron building to be converted to a hotel. So those kinds of things, just to, if I want to know more about the politics of Asheville, those are great places to start. Then we do have 46 committees and commissions that the city council appoints people to, and we're constantly advertising vacancies for those committees and commissions on the city's website. You can peruse those and apply for some. As I mentioned, we have an extremely involved community. So some of those committees and commissions are quite competitive. I mean, for the Historic Resource Commission, I've been amazed. We have people that apply that have master's degrees in historic preservation. And but then there are others where, and that's not to say that you have to, to be on the Historic Resource Commission. Anybody can apply, I'm assuming, right? But there are plenty of different committees and commissions. So some are a little intimidating for some people. For example, Planning and Zoning and the Board of Education, we actually conduct the interviews of the applicants in the City Council chamber, and they're broadcast streamed so people can view them. So that might not be everyone's cup of tea for starters, but take a look at the list and see if there's other things. And then also feel free to attend any of those committee and commission meetings. That is a great way to get started. I mean, as I mentioned, that's what I was doing. Just in my job, I might have gone in front of the Board of Adjustment or Planning and Zoning or the Historic Resource Commission, and I found it so interesting that I wanted to apply for one. So my first time serving for the city was on the Board of Adjustment, which some people might think is really boring because they deal with sign variances and setback variances and things like that. But I thought it was really interesting.
Right up your alley.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Mayor, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with us today. Really appreciate you sharing your insights, and best of luck this next year, rolling everything out and balancing the community and the needs of the city.
Thanks. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you.